The email arrived on a Tuesday morning with 3 words that stopped my heart. We found something. I stared at the message from my father's attorney for what felt like an eternity before my hands finally steadied enough to click open the full email. Estate complications regarding your brother's guardianship claims need immediate meeting, serious legal implications. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a mahogany-paneled office downtown, across from a man who looked older than his 65 years should allow. Your father's will was modified 7 times in the last 2 years, Mr. Harrison said, spreading documents across the desk like evidence at a crime scene. Each modification gave your brother James more control. The most recent one, signed just 3 weeks before your father's death, names James as executor and primary beneficiary. "That's not right," I said immediately. "My father hated James. They hadn't spoken in a decade." "I know, which is why I had the documents analyzed. Both his signature and your father's show signs of coercion." Mr. Harrison removed his glasses, rubbing eyes that had seen too many family tragedies. "The signatures were examined by a forensic specialist. Your father's signature was traced, likely signed under extreme stress or duress. Your brother James didn't just modify the will, he forged it." The room tilted. My father had died 8 months ago. We'd buried him on a Tuesday in the rain. James had given the eulogy, tears streaming down his face as he spoke about the man he claimed to have reconciled with just before his death. It had been a beautiful lie. "There's more," Mr. Harrison continued. "I've been investigating your brother's financial records. He had access to your father's accounts because your father, in his final illness, signed power of attorney documents. James transferred over $2.3 million to accounts in his name." I felt something break inside my chest. Is there anything illegal about that specifically? If he had power of attorney? If your father gave it willingly, perhaps not. But I have statements from your father's nurses saying that in the final weeks, your father was medicated with extremely high doses of pain relievers, psychiatric medications, and sedatives, more than was medically necessary. Someone wanted him compliant, confused, easy to manipulate. The room started spinning. My father's final weeks. I'd visited him, of course, dutiful son, but my career had been demanding, and I'd only managed 3 visits in those last crucial weeks. I'd found him sleeping both times. James had said it was better not to disturb him. "What about me?" I asked quietly. "What's my relationship to this?" Mr. Harrison pulled out another folder. "That's where it gets complicated. 6 months before his death, your father created a new trust. He wanted you named as secondary trustee, with specific instructions that were very detailed about protecting family assets from what he called opportunistic family members. Your brother James was specifically excluded." "Then why would he modify the will to—" "Because your father had a stroke 2 weeks after creating that trust. The timing was extremely convenient for your brother." Mr. Harrison's face was grave. "I believe James poisoned him." The words hung in the air like a held breath. "That's an accusation you can't make lightly," I said, though my voice sounded far away. "Which is why I called you instead of going directly to the police. I needed to verify something first." He opened his laptop, showing me bank records. "After your father's death, James withdrew $400,000 in cash. Over the next month, he made purchases from specialty pharmaceutical suppliers, medical-grade sedatives, barbiturates, things that wouldn't show up on standard toxicology screens." "But they did an autopsy," I said weakly. "They found he'd had a massive heart attack." "A heart attack brought on by chronic poisoning with digitalis glycosides, foxglove extract. It appears in some herbal medications and supplements. Completely undetectable in a standard autopsy unless specifically looked for. By the time your father's symptoms became severe enough to warrant that level of testing, it was assumed to be natural causes." I thought about my last visit with my father. He'd been confused, asking me the same question 3 times. He'd apologized for it, embarrassed. I'd attributed it to the pain medications. Now I understood. He was being systematically drugged into confusion by his own son. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "If you have evidence of poisoning." "Because I'm not certain enough yet to go to the police. Everything is circumstantial. The pharmaceutical purchases could have been for legitimate reasons. The will modifications could be explained as your father changing his mind. What we need is concrete evidence, a confession, recorded communications, something that proves intent." "And you want me to help you get that?" "I want you to understand what your brother has done, and I want you to understand the danger you may be in." "Danger?" I laughed, a broken sound. "James doesn't care about me. He got what he wanted. For now. But you're the named trustee on the accounts he can't access. If he tries to claim those assets, you'll be in his way." The implications unfurled like a horrible flower in my mind. My brother, desperate for money, had killed our father, had poisoned him slowly, methodically, making him seem senile before administering the final dose. And now, I stood between him and more money. My name is David Chen. I'm 42 years old, a successful cardiac surgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I have a house in Roland Park, a Tesla in the garage, and a life that, until that Tuesday morning, had seemed safely insulated from the kind of family dysfunction that destroyed other people. My brother James is 3 years younger than me, and we haven't spoken since I was 28 years old. He'd stolen $50,000 from our parents during a period where he was addicted to cocaine. When my father found out, James had blamed me, claiming I'd encouraged his drug use. Our parents believed him. I spent 2 years trying to convince them otherwise before finally giving up and cutting contact. It was the best decision I ever made, or so I thought. But now I understood. James hadn't just blamed me. He'd spent 15 years planning something far more elaborate. I left Mr. Harrison's office in a daze, driving to the cemetery where my father was buried. I stood at his grave for an hour, not crying, not quite able to process. My father had been a good man, a difficult man, but a good one. He'd built a successful business, raised 2 sons, worked hard. He didn't deserve to be murdered by his own child. Neither of us did, I realized. The question was what to do about it. I spent the next week investigating on my own, pulling records, calling the hospital where my father had died. The nurses who had cared for him were hesitant to speak, but eventually, one of them, a woman named Maria who'd been on the night shift frequently, agreed to meet me. "Your brother was always there," she said quietly. "Always bringing your father things to eat, things to drink. Supplements, he said, for better sleep, for pain management. Your father would ask questions sometimes, and your brother would smile and say the doctor recommended them." She paused. I thought something was off. Your father's coherence would vary so much. Some hours he was lucid, others he couldn't form complete sentences. It wasn't consistent with his conditions. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, not accusingly, just asking. "Because I didn't have proof, and because your brother was so convincing. He seemed so devoted, so loving. He'd hold your father's hand and tell him he loved him. He'd adjust his pillows and make sure he was comfortable. If I'd accused him, I would have needed evidence, and I didn't have any." The same refrain I was hearing again and again. James was too smart for that. He'd covered his tracks too well. But he'd made one mistake. I found it by breaking into his apartment. I'm not proud of that, but I was beyond caring about legal niceties. My father was dead, murdered by my brother, and the law wasn't going to help me without evidence. So I picked the lock on James's apartment using a tutorial from YouTube, let myself in, and started searching. He'd moved to a nice place in Canton, one that had been paid for with my father's money. There were expensive furnishings, art on the walls, a state-of-the-art kitchen. James had always had expensive taste and no money to support it. I found the evidence in his bedroom, in a wooden box under the bed, the kind of places people hid things when they thought no one would look. Medical records, detailed notes in James's handwriting, dosage calculations, times administered. A precise, methodical documentation of the poisoning of our father. He'd literally written down what he'd done. Digitalis glycoside, 0.5 mg added to evening supplement, 3 p.m. Father lucid. Will discussion in evening. Excellent response. Increased dose, 0.75 mg. Father confused. Requested changes to will witnessed. Doctor visit moved up. Need to schedule geriatric evaluation to establish mental decline pattern. It was a roadmap of premeditated murder written in my brother's precise handwriting. I photographed every page, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone steady. I was so focused on the documents that I didn't hear him come in. "Well, this is awkward," James said from the doorway, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. He stood there, my younger brother, looking exactly as he had at our father's funeral. Handsome, well-dressed, completely emotionless as he looked at me holding the evidence of his crime. "I came to talk to you," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "about what you did to Dad." "What I did?" James smiled, a terrifying expression. "David, I cared for him. I was there for him when you were too busy with your fancy medical career to visit. I was there when he was dying and afraid and in pain. You poisoned him. You murdered him." "Did I?" James stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Because I'm not the one holding evidence of a crime. I'm not the one who broke into someone's home. I'm not the one with a career to lose." The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. "You wanted me to find this." "Not initially, but I've had these for 8 months, and I got tired of worrying about them. So I became a little careless. I let someone see me with a medical journal about Digitalis poisoning. I made sure these notes weren't actually hidden that well." He smiled. "The question is, what are you going to do with them?" "Turn them over to the police." "And tell them what? That you broke into my apartment and stole private medical documents that I'll claim are fiction, a creative writing project? That you're a jealous sibling trying to frame me for our father's death? Do you have any idea how much reasonable doubt my lawyer can create?" He was right, and I knew it. What I had was inadmissible evidence, gathered illegally, that would be dismissed immediately. It proved nothing legally, even though it proved everything in terms of actual guilt. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do this?" "Because I was tired of being poor. Because you got the good genes and the steady life and the career. And I got addiction and failure and a father who never believed in me. Because he kept money from me, and I was his son, and I deserved my inheritance." He paused, and for a moment something that might have been actual emotion crossed his face. Because he had $1 million in liquid assets that he was going to leave to charity. Charity, David, while I was struggling, while I was desperate. "So you killed him?" "I medicated him until his heart gave out. There's a difference, technically." I wanted to hit him. I wanted to grab him by his perfectly tailored shirt and smash his face into the wall. Instead, I stood very still. "I'm going to the police." "No, you're not." James pulled a small revolver from his jacket pocket. My father's revolver, I realized with a start. The gun he'd kept in his nightstand for home security. "Because if you do, I'll tell them that you broke into my home tonight with the intention to steal money. I'll show them my security camera footage that clearly shows you entering. I'll tell them that you've been mentally unstable since our father's death, that you've been making accusations, that you're trying to frame me because of old family conflicts. That won't work. There are too many people who already know." "Who already know what? That you had a suspicion? That's not evidence, it's paranoia. And you know what I have? Video of you committing a felony. And a confession I'm going to write right now as you hold me at gunpoint." The horror of his plan unfolded in my mind. He was going to stage this. He was going to make it look like I'd come here to kill him, to steal money, to cover up my own crime in poisoning our father. He was going to frame me for his own murder of our father. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Shoot yourself?" "No," he smiled. "You're going to shoot me in self-defense." "You broke in here at night with intent to steal. We struggled, the gun went off, you panicked and ran. By morning, I'll be dead, and you'll be the man who killed his own brother. No one will believe. They will, because I'm going to make sure of it." He pointed the gun at his own chest. "Right now, I want you to understand your choice. You can shoot me in self-defense and claim I attacked you during a confrontation about our father's estate. You'll be investigated, but you'll probably be fine. Or you can refuse, and I'll shoot myself and leave a note saying you came here to kill me over the money. Either way, I win. Either way, our father's death becomes too complicated to prosecute." My hands were shaking. I had to make a choice between two impossible options, and my brother stood smiling in front of me, holding a gun to his own chest, knowing that either way he'd destroyed me. That's when I realized the truth. James had died a long time ago. Whatever human being had inhabited his body had been replaced by something else, some purely predatory animal that wore his face. "I choose the third option," I said quietly, and I knocked the gun out of his hand. The shot went wild, punching through the wall. James lunged for it, and I grabbed him, throwing him against the wall. We fought, brutally, without mercy. I'm a doctor, trained in anatomy, and my brother was an addict with weak muscles and poor conditioning. The fight lasted maybe 30 seconds before I had him pinned against the wall, his arm twisted up his back. "Call 911, I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Call them right now or I'll break your arm." "You'll go to jail," he gasped. "You broke in here." "I don't care. I'd rather spend a year in prison than live with the knowledge that I let you walk away from murdering our father." I pressed his arm harder. "Call, now." He called. The police arrived 15 minutes later to find a bleeding man with a twisted shoulder sitting in his apartment, next to his brother, the gun safely removed. The next 12 hours were a nightmare of police interrogations, explanations, and the gradual realization that I'd both solved the crime and destroyed my own future. The evidence I'd gathered illegally was inadmissible. My breaking and entering was a felony. The fight in James's apartment was technically assault, even though I was defending myself from a man threatening suicide and murder. I was arrested, but something unexpected happened. The police detective, a woman named Rebecca Martinez, reviewed the case with fresh eyes. She looked at my father's autopsy report and requested a specific toxicology test. Then she exhumed his body and ran the same test on tissue samples. The dialysis glycoside was there, abundant, unmistakable. Suddenly, the evidence I'd gathered illegally became corroborating evidence. The judge ruled that the illegality of my entry was mitigated by the fact that I'd called police immediately, and the actual evidence was confirmed by official testing. My charges were dropped. James's charges were not. The medical records he'd written were damning. He was charged with murder. His trial lasted 2 months, during which I testified about my break-in, about what I'd found, about what I believed had happened. My brother's defense was that the records were fiction, that he'd written them as a way to process grief, that they meant nothing. But then they brought in his pharmacy records, the dialysis glycosides he'd purchased. The timing of the purchases aligned with the dates in his notes. The prosecution built a mountain of circumstantial evidence that, over time, became undeniable proof. James was convicted. He's currently serving a life sentence in a federal penitentiary. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. The aftermath was more complicated than the crime itself. My father had been murdered. That was now legally established fact. But the rest of the family didn't handle that well. My mother had a breakdown. My aunts and uncles questioned whether I should have known, should have visited more, should have prevented it somehow. The medical community scrutinized me heavily. I'd committed felonies, even if they were later mitigated. There were investigations into my practice, into my judgment, into whether a man who would break into his brother's apartment could be trusted to make life and death decisions about patients. I lost 2 years of my life in depositions, court appearances, and professional reviews. In the end, I kept my medical license and my job, but something was broken in me that wouldn't heal. The money, what was left of it after legal fees and estate taxes, went to my mother. James's conviction meant the will modifications were voided and my father's original trust took effect. I was named executor, but I transferred that responsibility to a professional firm. I didn't want to touch it. 3 years after James's conviction, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I left medicine. I spent a year consulting for a health policy nonprofit, then transitioned fully into that work. I helped design systems to protect vulnerable patients from exploitation. I wrote papers about the signs of elder abuse, about how to recognize medication misuse, about the systemic failures that allowed someone like my brother to murder someone like my father. I also started visiting James in prison. People thought I was insane. My therapist thought I was self-destructive. But I needed to understand him, to know if there was any part of the man I'd grown up with still alive somewhere in the monster he'd become. Our first visit was through a plexiglass barrier. James smiled when he saw me, the same terrifying smile from the apartment. "David, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I wanted to see if you felt anything," I said simply. "Remorse, guilt, anything human." "I feel many things," James said calmly. "I feel angry that you betrayed me. I feel frustrated that my plan didn't work as well as I'd intended. I feel resentment that I'm in here while you get to walk free, playing the hero. That's not feelings, that's just complaints about your circumstances. What else is there?" James leaned closer to the plexiglass. "Do you think I should feel guilty for doing what was necessary to survive? Do you think I should apologize for wanting the life that you had? We're brothers. We should have been equal. Instead, I was always the failure and you were always the success. I fixed that equation. You killed our father." "I freed him," James corrected. "He was dying anyway. I just accelerated the process and took what should have been mine." I looked at my brother through the plexiglass, and I understood that there was nothing of the person I'd grown up with left in that body. Whatever potential James had once possessed had been destroyed, probably long before the poisoning, probably in some childhood moment of rejection or failure that I wasn't there to witness. I didn't visit again for 3 years. When I did, James was different, quieter, more subdued. He'd been in prison for 5 years by then, and the edges of his rage had smoothed into something that looked like resignation. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said when we were seated at the visiting table, no longer separated by plexiglass. "Neither did I. How's life? Still saving people? Still the hero?" "I'm not a hero. I'm a person trying to make sense of what happened to our family." James was quiet for a long moment. "I've been in therapy here, court mandated, but I actually went along with it. The therapist says I have antisocial personality disorder, that I was probably born this way, that there's nothing that could have been done to prevent it. Do you believe that? I don't know. It's easier to believe that than to believe I'm just evil." He looked at me with something that might have been actual humanity in his eyes. "Did I ever have a chance to be different, David? Or was it always going to end like this, David?" It was the first genuine question he'd ever asked me. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I was too young to know you before you started failing. I only remember you struggling, getting angry, blaming everyone else. Maybe if we'd had different parents, or if you'd gotten help, or if 100 different things had been different." I paused. "But none of that changes what you did. It doesn't erase it." "I know." He looked down at his hands. "I'll never get out of here. I know that. Even after I've served my time, the parole board won't release me. I'm dying in this place." "Probably. Does that satisfy you, knowing that?" I thought about that question very carefully. Did his life sentence satisfy me? Did it make up for my father's death? Did it give back the years I'd lost to investigation and trial and recovery? No, I finally said, but nothing would. You killed our father. No punishment is proportional to that. James nodded, accepting this truth. If I could go back, don't say you'd do it differently. You would make the same choices, and we both know it. You're not sorry about what you did. You're sorry about the consequences. He started to argue, then stopped. You're right. Over the years, I developed a strange, complicated relationship with my brother. Not forgiveness exactly, but something closer to understanding. I visited him every few years. We talked about our childhood, about our father, about the systems that had failed to protect my father and had failed to prevent James from becoming what he was. James eventually became the prison's mental health advocate, helping other inmates navigate psychiatric care and medication. It was ironic, given what he'd done, but I understood that he was trying to find some kind of meaning in his life, some way to be useful even locked away. 3 years ago, he wrote me a letter. I still have it. David, I've been in here for 17 years now. I'm 52 years old, and I'll die here. I've made peace with that. But before I die, I wanted you to know something. I was wrong. Not just about the specific crimes, but about everything. I was wrong about you being the successful one while I was the failure. I was wrong about thinking that stealing from our father would make me feel powerful. I was wrong about thinking that I deserved anything I didn't work for. I also want you to know that what I did to you, framing you, trying to destroy your career, causing you to live in this complicated guilt, that was as much a crime as what I did to our father. Maybe more so, because it was deliberate cruelty towards someone who loved me enough to visit. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for acknowledgement that I'm trying, here in this place, to become someone other than what I was. Not good necessarily, but less actively harmful. Our mother visited me last month. She's dying, David. She didn't say it directly, but I could tell. She's not recovering from her breakdown. She's just fading. Before she dies, I want you to know that I'm at peace with you. I don't expect you to be at peace with me, but if there's any grace in the universe, maybe you can find your way to it. I'm sorry. I know those words are insufficient, but they're the most honest things I've ever said to anyone. James. Our mother died 6 months later. She'd been declining for years, but her death still shocked me. I'd lost my father to my brother's hands, and I'd lost my mother to the grief that followed. In a way, James had killed them both. But I'd also started to heal. I'm 52 now, the same age James was when he wrote that letter. I'm still working in health policy. I've never remarried, though I've had relationships. I've built a life, not the one I would have chosen, but a real one, meaningful in its own way. Last month, I received a call from the penitentiary. James was requesting to see me, and it was urgent. I drove up the next day, not knowing what to expect. When they brought him out, I barely recognized him. He was 68 years old, but looked 80. Prison doesn't treat people gently, and James had received no special treatment. His hair was completely white, his face deeply lined, his body diminished. David, he smiled that old smile, but it was different now. Gentler, sadder. I'm dying. What? Cancer. Pancreatic. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe a year. I wanted to tell you myself before the prison notified you officially. I sat down heavily in the plastic chair across from him. My brother was dying. I don't know how to feel about that, I said honestly. I know. I've had time to prepare. I've made peace with it. He paused. I wanted to ask you something. When I'm gone, could you make sure my body is donated to science? I want to be useful one more time, even if it's just for research. Yeah, I said quietly. I can do that. Thank you. He reached across the table, and I let him take my hand. I hope you know, despite everything, that I do love you. I always did. It was twisted and wrong, but it was real. I know. We sat in silence for a long time after that, just holding hands across a prison table. Finally, I spoke. Do you think there's any way things could have been different? I used to think I was born this way, defective, but I don't think so anymore. I think I made choices. I made lots of small choices that led to bigger ones, and eventually, those choices led me here. He squeezed my hand. But I also think that I'm not my worst choice. I'm not just what I did to Dad. I'm also the person trying to help other inmates understand their medication. I'm the person who wrote that letter. I'm the person sitting here, holding my brother's hand, grateful for it. He died 4 months later. I was with him at the end, holding his hand in a prison hospital bed. There was no redemption in it, no neat resolution. He was just my brother, dying, and I was there, and it mattered in some small way. After he was gone, I spent a year in therapy processing everything. I realized that I'd carried so much anger toward James that it had become part of my identity. I was the man whose brother murdered his father. I was the doctor who broke into his brother's apartment. I was the victim in this tragedy. But I also realized that I was more than that. I was a survivor. I was someone who'd built a meaningful life out of trauma. I was someone who'd learned to find grace, however imperfectly. I left my job in health policy last year. I'm starting a nonprofit focused on protecting vulnerable elderly patients from family exploitation. It's my way of making sure that what happened to my father never happens to anyone else's family. It's not redemption for what I did, those illegal actions that ultimately proved necessary. It's not forgiveness for James, because I'm not sure I'll ever fully forgive him. But it's something real, something that matters. Sometimes I drive past the cemetery where my father is buried, and I stand at his grave and tell him what we've done with the wreckage of his death. I tell him about the systems we're putting in place, about the families we're protecting, about the brother he raised who became a murderer, and the other son he raised who learned to live in the complicated space between justice and grace. And I think about that narrow footbridge that Sarah described in my earlier reflection, not the wide bridge of unrestrained trust before the betrayal, but a fragile connection carefully maintained that allowed for some kind of relationship. That's what I've built with the memory of my family, a narrow footbridge. It's not perfect, it's not what I would have chosen, but it's real, and it's mine, and it holds. When I'm old and this is all behind me, I think I'll be okay with that.